Susan Plum is a Mexican artist who lived for many years in the United States and who currently lives in Mexico. The artist used a very thin diameter Pyrex rod to create this sculpture, which is about as big as it can possibly get and support its own weight. If the sculpture were any bigger, it might collapse in on itself. For this reason, we consider it almost like a bubble, as something that is almost miraculously holds together. Susan Plum has studied the cosmology of the ancient Maya, and she was very intrigued to learn that the Maya conceived of the universe as a loom, woven with strands of light. These strands of light became tangled around the earth, and according to Mayan thought, it was the shaman's role to untangle those threads. For that reason, she calls this piece Woven Heaven, Tangled Earth,